Ailment is an action shooter game which was ported from mobile to Switch in May of this year. And now just a few short months later we have Endurance Space Action, a prequel which tells us of the story which led up to the events in Ailment. Once again, the game takes place on a spaceship, the Endurance, and the corpses that litter its rooms hint that a terrible event has occurred, and then we're taken back in time 3 days earlier where we get to experience the event as they unfold firsthand. So let's take a look and see whether Endurance is worth your time and money. My name's Gotcake, and I welcome all you Star Seekers to Star or Shovelware. So unlike Ailment, in Endurance we're able to first select a character to play as prior to beginning the game. Each character comes with various stats including health, movement speed, shield recharge rate and trap detection, and in one form or another all of them are called Sam to save on time creating additional in-game dialogue. So we begin the game in a science lab 3 days prior to the catastrophic event which killed all but one of the Endurance's crew. The game features standard twin stick controls, we fire with R and can switch between weapons with ZL and ZR, and we can also expand the minimap seen in the top left corner by hitting L. This lets us see our objectives which are marked with red squares, and our first port of call is to go and speak to Marta about some strange events that have started to occur due to experiments with something called Serenity 11. Marta then asks us to go and find a guy called Dr Fruzenstein who's leading the experiments, but as we get on our way a bunch of the crew members suddenly go apeshit and start killing people, tearing them to pieces and punching the heads clean off. And so we fight them back and punch our way through several other rooms full of maniacs, continuing onwards, eventually finding a weapon within a storage container. Now the game contains quite a wide variety of weapons including machine guns, rocket launchers and flamethrowers, and we can find them hidden in other storage containers, or after we encounter them in game we can then buy them in the gun shop using credits earned from killing enemies. Each weapon comes with different rates of fire, damage and range, but in all honesty I used quite a few weapons in the game and none of them are very good. Most of the machine gun type weapons feel the same, the rocket weapons generally fire too slow, and while the first few ranged enemies aren't too difficult, you soon start to find yourself being constantly overwhelmed by groups of enemies whose weapons fire twice as fast as your own. Generally I found combat in the game to be a pretty dull affair. There's very little skill involved and it's near impossible to dodge the majority of enemy attacks, so you just end up soaking up a ton of damage as you try and fight back. Further into the game I just ended up running past enemies to save on health as well as weapon durability, because each time you fire your weapon it loses durability and you have to find duplicates or weapon repair kits in containers to restore it. Now the credits that you collect can also be used to upgrade your character's stats, though none of them really make much of a difference, and you'll end up spending most of your money just using the heal in this menu to recover lost HP after each fight. Now you can also find pickups within containers which also upgrade your stats, but the health regen was still incredibly slow even after I pumped most of my points into it. Trap detection is a joke as you rarely spot hidden traps and instead end up walking over them, and shield recharge seems completely pointless as you don't find the power shield until about halfway through the game, and even then it never actually seemed to work and the bar above its icon never seemed to recharge. Every now and then we also gain companions who follow us around, but they're next to useless as they constantly walk into mines and lasers, are pretty terrible in combat and don't really fight back, and I found their only real use is as a meat shield to soak up enemy fire, but once they die they never return. So levels in Endurance consist of a basic combination of corridors and rooms laid out in different ways. In almost every single level the objective involves you heading to smaller red markers on your map to open doors, and then heading to larger red markers to complete an objective before moving on to the next level. Now you can take the time to explore all the rooms in a level and will occasionally find new weapons, medkits or upgrade packs, but more often than not you'll just find empty containers and lockers or additional enemies waiting to sap your health, so it's really not worth your time and effort. To add a little variety to gameplay, there are a couple of levels where you're instructed to run to an end marker as enemies swarm from rooms and corridors, which are about as interesting as they sound. Being me though, I had to see what happened when the timer reached 0, and I found that you simply fail the level and have to start it over again. Events in other levels see you having to fend off enemies and survive for a period of time, and you would assume that this would be for like a minute or two at most, but no, you have to survive for 5 whole minutes. Now you're supposed to head to the red marker on the map to fight off waves of enemies, but I just stood still on the first occasion and killed a few enemies every so often, and on the second occasion I just went and hid in a room and went AFK for 5 minutes to make a cup of tea. Following these survival events you then just have to make a dash through the enemy infested room to the end of the level. So when it comes to the enemies in the game, there's a little bit of variety, but the majority of them are just generic humanoid, drone or robot enemies who wield a number of different ranged weapons. Now there are also several bosses in the game who wield more powerful weapons, take a lifetime to kill and reward credits when they die, and while you can face them head on, you can also just choose to cheese them by shooting rockets into the room, or alternatively you can just ignore them altogether and walk straight past them to the level's exit. So I played the game for about 3 hours or so, and I believe I made it through the majority of the game, but in all honesty I found it to be a repetitive cycle of moving from objective to objective, activating switches to open doors and running past enemies to reach the end of the levels. Now you're told at the start of the game that you get 2 attempts to complete a level, but when you die you then have to actually spend money to use these attempts, which revives you on the spot with around a quarter of your health. If you run out of attempts or don't have enough money to revive, then you have to restart the level from the beginning with whatever health you initially started the level with. And this is what resulted in me quitting the game before I completed it. I began a level which required me to run past a bunch of enemies but only had around 300 HP and enough money for 1 heal. I then died and had to retry the level several times when attempting the run, and after finally completing it and activating the end of level objective, a bunch of enemies burst through the door and instantly wiped out my remaining 200 HP. After that I really could not be arsed to try it again. So bar a few visual upgrades and the integration of real twin stick shooter mechanics, it seems that there's very little difference between Endurance and Ailment. The storyline is pretty cliche, lacks any real intrigue, and despite the eShop's claims it won't shock you with its twists, and in no way is Endurance a roguelike game. If you enjoyed Ailment then you'll probably enjoy Endurance, but I personally just found it to be a repetitive and relatively generic twin stick shooter which lacked any real excitement. So with that said, let's get on to rating the game. Now I rate games between 1 and 5 stars, with a shovelware stamp of approval reserved for the worst games on the eShop. This rating is my own personal opinion on the quality and quantity of gameplay a title offers, and whether I think it offers value for money to potential buyers. And for a rating I'd give Endurance Space Action 1 out of 5 stars. While I recognise and grant praise that the game is developed by one person and Ailment performed very well at a free mobile game, Endurance does little to improve on Ailment's formula, offers very little originality in both its gameplay and storyline, and I would personally recommend waiting for a sale before trying it out. You can get Endurance Space Action from the UK Switch eShop for £7.99 or from the US eShop for $7.99. Alternatively, the game's also available on Steam. And so that's it for this review of Endurance Space Action. Hit that like button if it helped you out, and let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Make sure to subscribe if you want to be notified of future Switch reviews and content, and jump onto the Starseekers Discord server to become part of the growing community there. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, game on.